Hello, everyone. We'll get started here in just a minute at the top of the hour, but just wanted to let you know if you're joining us, we will be using Slido.com to administer the questions. So while you're waiting for us to get started, if you want to go ahead and access Slido, you can go to Slido.com and enter that code, and there'll be the questions up on the screen there. We'll flash this information throughout the webinar, so you'll see it. But just if you want to go ahead and get yourself settled, we'll get started in just a moment. Hello, everyone. Welcome to joining us this afternoon. The webinar that we are today is, do you know what's lurking in your SaaS portfolio? So for all of you joining us, this is going to be about your software spend. We thought we'd play on the Halloween theme. Hopefully you got a chuckle out of that. Today, our webinar, we will be using Slido.com as the administrator of our polling questions. So if you're not familiar with that application, it's pretty cool. It's a little bit more interactive than GoToWebinar, which is why we use it. So just go to Slido.com and enter that code #123, and it will allow you to be on Slido at the same time you're watching the webinar on GoToWebinar. Please, when you go in and register on Slido, you must register use the email address that you used when you registered on GoToWebinar, so they match when we go through and do the CPE credentials. So next, we went over Slido. So next, let's just talk a second about the webinar. If you have any questions for our presenters while they're presenting about the topic or anything in general, you can go to the dashboard on GoToWebinar in that questions pane and type in anything, or if you have technical difficulties, and we can help you out there as well. Also, the handout section on the GoToWebinar dashboard is where you can download a copy of the materials if you want to save those for your record or follow along, whichever works for you. If you are interested in CPE for this webinar, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. One, you must be on GoToWebinar for at least 50 minutes, attending and listening to the webinar on that application. Two, you must also answer the polling questions on the Slido app, and we'll show you the login information for that if you missed it earlier. Answer at least three of the 4 questions. If you meet those 2 requirements, you will be eligible for 1 CPE credit hour, and we will email you a link to download your certificate and a follow-up email sometime next week. So it won't be available directly after the webinar. We'll send you that information. If you have any questions, again, you can use the questions pane in the GoToWebinar dashboard, or you can reach out to us at cpeinfo@leasequery.com. At the end of the webinar, we'll send out a survey if you want to give us any feedback about what you did or did not enjoy about the webinar, and we'll take that in advisement with our new programming. And that's it for our housekeeping items. Thank you for your patience while we went through those. Hopefully you can now enjoy our presenters, Rachel and Stephen, as they walk through how to find out what is lurking in your SaaS portfolio. Welcome, Stephen and Rachel. Happy Halloween.
Thanks, Kylie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Rachel Reed. I'm one of the technical accounting managers here at LeaseQuery. Been here 5 years now, and I'm on as an accounting resource. But I'm joined today by Stephen Hester, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm really excited to talk through some more SaaS spend management use cases and hopefully educate the group on some practical strategies that your organization can adopt today to make software auditing simpler and easier across the organization.
Thanks, Stephen. So our contact information is listed here if you have any questions about the content of the webinar, or if you just want to add us on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. You who haven't joined a LeaseQuery webinar before, again, welcome. But for those of you that have, just might look a little bit different than normal because LeaseQuery did have an acquisition recently of a SaaS spend management platform called Stackshine. And it's a perfect match for us as an organization, as our mission is to empower accounting and finance teams by simplifying the complex. And this acquisition really illustrates our commitment to that mission by taking on a complex issue for organizations, which is SaaS spend management. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to do a really quick review of SaaS and why it's relevant and what it means. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about problems that have arisen with SaaS sprawl and the access that everybody has as organizations to constantly get new software. And then Stephen's going to talk through what to do about that and how to find your true cost of SaaS and some practical steps that you can take as an organization. For doing so, we would love to hear from you. We're going to kick off our very first polling question of the day, which is, what do you think of when you hear SaaS? And as a reminder, if you're just joining us, this webinar, if you are interested in earning CPE credit, you can earn 1 hour of CPE credit, but you will need to answer at least 3 of these 4 polling questions and stay on for at least 50 minutes. And in order to answer these polling questions, you're going to want to join at slido.com using either the code on your left here, or you can scan the code, but it's code 132, and making sure that you're registered. And then, of course, answering this first question. So we've got a lot of people that look like we are typing right now on our first polling question. Looks like a lot of people learned maybe from the last webinar that SaaS is software as a service. Seems to be the most popular response so far. I'm seeing costly, which is definitely the case, which we're going to talk about today. Headache. I can understand that, especially, if you're in IT, probably be a headache trying to wrap your head around the different softwares that you all use. Seeing some more responses come in. GASB 96, so might be someone out there who's a governmental reporter who has to deal with GASB 96 for subscription-based IT arrangements. So keep those responses coming. We're going to leave this open for another few minutes, let everybody settle in here. So again, the question is, what do you think of when you hear SaaS? All right. Still, the most popular item is software as a service and software. So again, that makes sense since that appears to be the definition of SaaS. All right. Got a few more people typing, seeing accounting standards, accounting systems, month end, complicated, complex, automation. So SaaS is wonderful. We're going to talk about why it's great, and then we'll also talk about how it can cause problems for you as an organization. So we're definitely seeing both of those types of responses in here today. Just another few seconds. All right, thanks everyone for answering the first polling question, which was, what do you think of when you hear SaaS? Now we're going to get into it. So why are we talking about SaaS? Why are organizations using SaaS? Why is there so much SaaS prevalent everywhere? So just quick background. If you, again, haven't attended prior webinars or might be newer to this concept. So SaaS sounded like a lot of you guys already knew this, but it's software as a service. That's what it stands for. It's that acronym there. And it's part of the concept of cloud computing, which is delivering computing services over the internet, i.e. in the cloud. And it's just a wide variety of arrangements, SaaS is, providing delivery through the cloud, managed by a vendor. Just really the short of it is it allows you to access apps through the internet. It's one of the main three categories of cloud computing, along with platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. We're not going to be talking too much about those today. And it's everywhere. I mean, I bet every single person on the call today, if you're working today, has already used some sort of a SaaS product at work. And it's only continuing to get more prevalent. Obviously, the remote workforce, the rise of that has moved a lot of information to the cloud, but also just because of the influx of available technology that we have and how it's just gotten better and better. Because of that, because of the influx of all this technology, organizations, Lease Korea included as a company, have significantly increased the cost of SaaS spend as an organization. In fact, SaaS spend is now one of the 3 largest expenses for organizations, along with personnel costs and lease costs. SaaS is everywhere. Here are some common software that you might be familiar with. Again, we're going to be talking about software as a service. If you're a Lease Korea client, Lease Korea is a SaaS product. You've also got some other platforms as a service, infrastructure as a service, data warehouse as a service. So again, these are collectively known as cloud computing. Other popular SaaS applications or for organizations like yourself might be other Microsoft products, Zoom, any sort of subscription to like an online accounting guidance that maybe you use to research the new standards. So these are obviously just a few, but as we'll see, organizations on average use over 100 different SaaS products. So why the cloud? Why are we moving into the cloud? What's the big deal about the cloud? So a lot of reasons why everything is moving in that direction. Everything's sort of trending away towards or from the on-prem and towards the cloud. If you don't know what I mean by on-prem, on-premises, just basically where the software is installed directly on the premise or on your computers as an organization, and it's hosted locally through the company's own infrastructure, where cloud software is stored on the provider servers and accessed through a web browser. So again, everything's moving away from on-prem onto the cloud because it's easier for buyers, but also even for providers to deploy SaaS solutions than on-prem, because they're able to easily implement them without having the cost of going out and implementing it on the local drives. So, if you have some softwares today that are sort of legacy, you'll probably see any sort of upgrades are going to end up being on the cloud. Obviously, for the buyer, it's more cost effective because it's often on a subscription model. It's more accessible because you can access applications from anywhere without having to worry about it being stored on your local drives. It can be scaled up or down to meet your needs as an organization. And as I mentioned, because they're implemented through the cloud, they can be integrated very quickly into your organization's processes rather than having to go through these very long and grueling on-prem implementations, which I'm sure a lot of you out there have implemented, a legacy ERP system, and it takes months to do so. So like I mentioned, companies are moving into the cloud. Everything appears to be going that direction. And according to a study that was done by EY, who we're all familiar with, I actually used to work there, SaaS is expected to surpass 50% of the software deployment in the next few years. As you can see, in 2019, prior to the pandemic and the rise of the remote workforce, on-prem actually accounted for 59% of the total revenue share, as opposed to 41% for SaaS. And then by the end of 2023, that is projected to switch, 53% going to be in SaaS, as opposed to 47%. So we've established that SaaS is everywhere and everyone's using it, and there's a lot of great reasons why everyone is using it. But since people are using it more, organizations are spending more on SaaS. Well, how much are people spending on SaaS and how much is it growing? Well, a lot. So Gartner actually predicts that SaaS spending will reach $232 billion, that's right, with a B, in 2024, up from $197 billion in 2020. Which is almost a 20% increase year over year, and that's only going to continue to grow. Now, while that's a huge number, it's not super hard to believe, considering that the average organization subscribes to over 125 different software applications. 125. And that totals roughly $1,000 per employee per year. And unfortunately, IT is typically only aware about a third of those due to what we're going to talk about today, SaaS sprawl. And unfortunately, a lot of this money is wasted on licenses and software that isn't even used by employees. And actually about 50% of these licenses are not actually regularly used. And that's because, like we're going to talk about, you've got different things like zombie accounts and SaaS sprawl and shadow IT. And it just gets out of hand, different ways that it's purchased, as an organization. We'll talk about those, but it's just not centralized. And it's super easy to purchase software. It's super easy to download something without even having to go through IT approval. Now, in terms of this spending, I have a quote actually from an executive that said almost half the money you spent on SaaS is wasted, but the problem is he doesn't know which half. So that's the problem, isn't it? That companies don't know how much money they're spending, or they know they're spending a lot, they just don't know which is wasted. Gartner does predict that by 2026, 50% of organizations are going to centralize their SaaS, and it's going to continue to be a top priority for IT leaders to take control of these costs. So I hinted at this concept a little bit earlier, but I want to talk about something called SaaS sprawl. And SaaS sprawl, you might not have heard this expression, but you probably know what urban sprawl is. It's a similar concept here with SaaS. It's the uncontrolled use of applications by an organization, and it's caused by different departments buying software without communicating with each other or getting approval. And this is natural. Like this, it's not uncommon for this to happen. In fact, most organizations have some level of SaaS sprawl, and it doesn't happen overnight. There's a string of causes that leads to SaaS sprawl, one of which I mentioned a little bit earlier, but the ease of purchase of software. It's super easy to buy software. You don't have to often even download anything. It's all accessed through your web browser. And so that leads to organizations buying or signing up for things without, communicating that to IT or, even talking to other departments to see what they might already have. Centralization can cause SaaS sprawl as well. Since if there's not one place or one knowledge base where everything lives, and you don't have an idea of what applications are in play as an organization, companies are just going to download similar things with same functionalities, and you end up with duplication of softwares and then duplications of cost. Additionally, bring your own device policies can cause SaaS sprawl because it allows organizations or people to install these applications on their own devices rather than organizations having a little bit more control over what's being installed. And then the need for speed can cause SaaS sprawl because people just need something quick. They don't want to go through the process of looking for the software or learning the software that they may already have, and they just download something quickly to get something done. So what problems does this create for you as an organization? Well, quite a lot. Security breaches is one of the top problems that the SaaS sprawl creates because these different SaaS applications have a lot of confidential data within them, and that needs to be protected. And it can cause loss or theft of data since you have a large number of unverified apps. That obviously increases your risk of data loss or theft. So you have these different softwares and sensitive data floating around, more likely you're going to end up with a security issue. And then of course, if you have software like duplication of software or software they're not using, you end up with inflated costs. Since there's cost all over, you don't know what you're spending. You have no clue how to budget for it even. SaaS sprawl causes that. Compliance challenges, for an organization. If you have no visibility on the size of your SaaS stack, then it makes compliance challenging as an organization. Productivity disruption, because you can have duplicated efforts in different departments using different applications, inefficiencies can arise, along with data silos and confusion. And we'll talk about a survey in one of the next slides, some of the direct impact that we've seen it cause. And it does cause shadow IT, which we're going to again talk about in a slide or two. So a lot of different problems that SaaS can cause. And according to Gartner, again, going back to Gartner, through 2027, organizations that fail to centrally manage their SaaS lifecycles will remain 5 times more susceptible to a cyber incident or data loss. So don't want that to be you. So what other problems does SaaS sprawl create? Well, we have the results from a recent Gartner survey that was done. And the question was asked, how often have you encountered the following problems in your organization? It's due to SaaS sprawl. And this survey was conducted back in 2022 among almost 5,000 full-time employees that use digital technology for work purposes at organizations that have 100 or more employees. And the survey says 47% of these digital workers struggled to find information that they needed to effectively perform their jobs. So that's one of the highest problems that we saw, or the biggest problem that we saw, which is 47%. We also have getting irrelevant notifications at 45%. We've got making the wrong decision due to lack of awareness. 32% of them experienced that due to too many softwares in play, and 36% missed or failed to notice important updates because of the number of applications that were used or the volume of information produced on them. So too many apps, too many things going on, too much information, you're getting irrelevant notifications, not making right decisions, struggling to find information, or missing important updates. And additionally, 66% of those surveyed agreed that better business outcomes could be achieved if IT simply provided universally accepted and supported applications and devices to get the work done. And continuing on from Gartner, there's actually from a senior analyst at Gartner, the employees are struggling to stay afloat as the information and applications are flooding their workspace. And while workers may try to put in effort to manage the content individually to reduce duplication or improve knowledge sharing, finding information can be hard for them. And digital workplace leaders need to create a process, which we'll talk about today, for their employees that enables them to agree on applications that they use to accomplish work. So the ultimate result of SaaS sprawl is employees struggling to find information, security issues, making bad decisions or wrong decisions, getting irrelevant notifications, just missing important things. Now, one of the other problems that SaaS sprawl creates is shadow IT, which is the use of IT-related hardware or software by someone without alerting the IT department. Spooky, right? So it's all these different services that you use without explicit permission of IT. And this happens all the time, right? SaaS sprawl creates shadow IT. You're working on a project, you've got kind of a lengthy IT review process for new apps. And you got a deadline. You got a deadline for your project. And rather than go through IT and inform them of the need, see what they can improve, you say, you know what, no harm here. I know this software, we're going to just use the company credit card because it's probably immaterial as an expense to use for a short amount of time. Or maybe even use your personal credit card and you just want to get reimbursed for it later. Well, what ends up happening is you purchase the app or sign up for this app with the intent to cancel it, but maybe you never do. And IT never knows that the software was even being used. So why would anybody do this? Why would anybody circumvent the process and approval from IT? Well, rather than use unfamiliar technology that they are not trained on, people like to use what they know. Maybe at a previous company, an employee used a project management tool called Asana, and maybe they don't subscribe to that at their current company. And they're like, hey, I was really successful using Asana for project management previously. I'm just going to use this, and using it will allow me to be more productive because I don't need to get trained on it. It seems harmless, right? Well, no, not harmless. Another reason why people do this is again, efficiency. They want stuff done quickly rather than having to use the company sanctioned product that maybe doesn't fit their needs to do their job. So they'll just turn to using shadow IT. So is it bad? I mean, employees don't have malicious intent normally, right? I mean, it happens all the time, and getting work done efficiently sounds like a good thing. Well, in some cases, while shadow IT is contributing to productivity, it can be good. But despite the argued benefits, shadow IT still poses a serious risk to organizations, and IT needs to be alerted anytime that a new software is in use. Because shadow IT can cause zombie accounts. Woo. So what are zombie accounts? Well, a zombie account is an account that hasn't been used or for an extended period. Becomes a zombie account. And they're an unfortunate byproduct of not only shadow IT, but also just the convenience of all the SaaS products out there. Because again, it doesn't often involve IT, employees don't tell IT, and they have no idea that they're using these softwares, and ultimately that there are these accounts out there that aren't even being used. So how are these created? How do you end up with zombie accounts? Well, one of the main ways that you end up with zombie accounts is they're missed during offboarding. If someone leaves a company, IT has to identify all the different accounts and make sure they're deactivated. But if they don't know the different accounts that they've been using, then how are they going to offboard an account for a software that they don't even know exists or that they're using? So that happens pretty frequently and creates zombie accounts. Other projects, like one-off projects, where again I mentioned this earlier, where maybe you buy or use a software with the intent to cancel, and then you don't. Despite your best intentions, you get distracted. You forget the account's out there, becomes inactive, you end up with a zombie account. And then another way this happens is if an employee doesn't leave the company but switches teams or switches departments, changes roles, it doesn't trigger an offboarding process because they're not leaving the company, but their responsibilities probably change. And if they still have an application or a subscription for an application and they don't use it anymore, and they didn't tell anybody because they're trying to move into their new role, there's no offboarding process, it's missed, you end up with an account that's a zombie account, and you end up with security risks. So obviously the security risk is the big one. If you have accounts that are storing your data and you're not using them, you can end up with a cybersecurity risk, financial risk, you end up with compliance risk, all the risks we've talked about. Zombie accounts are no good for anybody. So with all that being said, hate to be the bearer of bad news there with all those different spooky things you can have. We want to talk about you guys as an organization. And wow, first thing that pops up is a lot of you had said, I don't know how many SaaS applications we have. So we'll talk about that. But of course, as a reminder, if you want to join the polling question, you'll need to join at slido.com, put in the code on your screen 132. And answer the polling question. If you would like to be eligible for CPE credit, you'll need to stay on for at least 50 minutes and answer 3 of the 4 polling questions. This question is approximately how many SaaS applications does your organization have? So you heard me say it earlier, on average, organizations are actually subscribed to 125 different softwares. I'm sure that when we did our evaluation, we probably thought we were subscribed to, maybe 25 to 50 or 0 to 25. But as we uncovered the different softwares, that we realized that number gets a lot higher. It's important to note here that a lot of the people out there, I don't know what your role is, who are saying, I don't know, but a lot of you don't know. And if you're not in IT or you're not responsible for the different softwares, you genuinely might have absolutely no clue. And we're going to talk about how you can fix that today. So I'm going to leave this open for just a few more seconds. How many software applications do you think that your organization has? All right, we'll close this in 3, 2, 1. Thanks everyone for answering the second polling question. Talked a lot about the problems, right? I've been the bearer of bad news today. Talked a lot about the spooky things that you can have, shadow IT, zombie accounts, SaaS sprawl. Now we're going to talk about the solution. And I'm going to let Stephen really get into this, but just kind of teeing him up here, the step in the right direction is going to be an internal software license audit. And that'll check whether you're complying with the terms and the policies that you have in place for software use, and auditing your license use, checking for over licenses, under licenses, unauthorized use. And that could be as simple as you just compiling a list of the software that you use and figuring out what you're spending on it. or it could be more advanced. You can have a third party help you find different areas of improvement, giving you recommendations. And there's plenty of reasons why you should do a software audit. If I haven't convinced you enough already through those different scary concepts earlier, some other benefits are maintaining software quality, ensuring that you have the top of the line software, and providing or getting any sort of upgrades, removing those unused licenses like those shadow IT and zombie accounts. It'll help you save costs because you're no longer going to be paying for accounts that don't exist, and you're probably spending right now on things that you're not even getting all the benefits from. It'll help you improve your operations once you identify what's compatible and what you need, and you're not wasting time and wasting employees' time trying to find information. You end up reducing that security risk and ultimately creating a better software budget because you will actually know what you have and what you're spending and what you're using and whether it's necessary or redundant, and then you'll be able to potentially save money in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steven, and he's going to talk about what you can do today.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to go through these kind of three major topics here. Where we want to kind of start with is just assessing where your organization may exist in relation to our SaaS audit scale and kind of assessing your own capabilities. And then we'll talk through a few practical steps to improve those. And then ultimately, we want to kind of leave everyone with this idea of going back to your organization and helping to define a strategy for maintaining continuous improvement within these areas. So as we kind of hop to this next slide, the first thing you want to do is sort of understand the status quo. Ultimately, you have to answer that question: how is your organization managing SaaS today? So LeaseQuery itself has been having conversations with dozens of companies over the past few months or so, and we're even kind of seeing it in some of our webinar responses as well. But most teams are still kind of working in this self-described suboptimal way by relying on a spreadsheet. And so even looking back to those data points from the previous webinar back in September, around 40, maybe a little over 40% of all the attendees recognized that that was sort of the primary vector for how their organization was managing software. And we all kind of know the challenges that can bring. So Rachel went through a whole bunch of implications and ramifications if you don't manage things in relation to your SaaS. And then we will try to do that really complex task using a spreadsheet. And it creates a lot of blind spots and a ton of overhead to actually maintain our environment. So when we think about kind of the next set of solutions we want to pursue, as we go to the next slide, we can start kind of analyzing where we are as an organization so we can figure out what the right approach will be. The spreadsheet is always kind of the first approach, but it may not be the right approach for your organization. But then again, a fully automated, heavily invested into tool may not be as well at this stage. So what we want to do is kind of analyze our own organization and our environment to understand, okay, how are we positioned in relation to our actual SaaS spend and SaaS management? And really you can kind of evaluate this on sort of two axes. So across the bottom here, we have the total number of employees. And then across the y-axis is the total amount of SaaS investment. This kind of are the two inputs for our function to determine how complex do our own processes need to be in order to maintain and manage our SaaS environment. So you can kind of see at the top right here, ultimately, as your company grows in size and as your investment grows in dollars, you're going to find this need to transition to more complex solutions. So when we kind of push that down to a specific thing like looking at the total number of employees, what does this really mean to an organization? It means that there are going to be more licenses. There are going to be more accounts created, more accounts that need to be deprovisioned, meaning you're going to have a significant amount of manual tasks appearing just to maintain the operations of your organization. This is ultimately the scale problem. And I know most people on this call are probably not in IT, but to give you perspective from an IT viewpoint, generally, IT organizations are set up to be most successful when there's one IT person for about every 50 employees they're supporting within a business. But we're transitioning really quickly from one IT to 100 or maybe even 200 full-time employees, and that proportion is continuing to expand. So as we kind of look at these suboptimal ways, like a spreadsheet to manage these, all of the different SaaS solutions that our company relies upon, it becomes more and more difficult for the same number of IT people to manage a company that has increasing scale with just a number of employees within it. And then at the same time, we want to look at the SaaS investment, right? So with more investment into these tools comes more financial risk to your business. So I always kind of use this adage where no one had the objective to go out and buy software. You're buying the software to actually reach an objective. So as our investment is increasing, that means we're likely relying more and more on point or specialized solutions. And we start seeing this push towards more emphasis on things like ROI and understanding if these solutions are actually solving business problems. Because if we're not monitoring those costs and effectively allocating for those costs, then we may be wasting money on solutions that are not really productive for our company anymore. And then you can sort of see yourself potentially in this chart, maybe in a few of these industries. That's a key component of when we want to analyze our own ecosystem, kind of looking at multi-variables to determine where we exist across this continuum, because a technology company and a retail organization are not built the same. They have a different organizational structure. So something like a technology company likely has fewer employees, maybe in the low hundreds, potentially up to 1,000 or so, but their SaaS investment is incredibly high. So even though they have fewer accounts and licenses to manage, every license is extremely meaningful because technology companies may have 20 to 30 SaaS apps per employee. And then you kind of look at an organization like a retail company where they could have thousands or even tens of thousands of employees, but a large number of them probably don't even really have that much SaaS associated with their day-to-day work. They may have an identity so they can log into some corporate systems, but generally the SaaS is being handled in the back office. So that group of people is much smaller. So we want to be able to manage across that whole scale so that we can find the most appropriate solution. So going to the next slide, we'll kind of talk through sort of ways to evaluate how your company operates today and how it could operate in the future. Now, this is sort of a very cluttered slide. We're not going to read every single bullet point that's listed here, but ultimately it's kind of along these continuums where we want to increase the level of effectiveness across our organization in these 4 key areas. So being able to have better means of producing an application inventory, better means of analyzing and reviewing our spend and license assignments, dovetailing that into our security and access reviews, and then ultimately kind of building policies and procedures that better support the operational aspect of all of these things so that we can be more efficient and more effective as a business. You're probably going to see yourself in a bunch of different boxes here. And of course, this isn't a fully comprehensive list of all the different ways you could manage your software and audit your software expenses, but it gives you kind of an idea of how you can stage gate your progress and improve along these continuums, ultimately trying to reach level 2 or level 3. So let's break these down a little bit. Looking at the first categorization, application inventory, this is sort of the most important step to performing the software audit. It's understanding what software is in use and who is using it. And I think Rachel had already mentioned before, looking at some of the Gartner numbers there, most companies are really accounting for about 30 to 35% of the total application stack, which means that entire 70% is stuck in that shadow IT realm. This could be a set of applications that are costing your business money, and they're showing up in all different varieties of expenses, be it miscellaneous, on a different GL, through credit card transactions, reimbursements. But beyond just kind of a material impact from a money standpoint, this level of shadow IT creates a lot of security and operational risk for your organization as well. And so when we think about the level of complexity our solution needs to be in order to tackle this type of problem, we're always going to kind of hover around this level 1. So you can see most of the companies we've spoken to and surveyed sort of fit within this mold today. There is a spreadsheet, it's the master inventory, and it's updated yearly, quote unquote. It's updated as best as it can be. And in a smaller organization, that could be suitable for today. But as we grow in size and complexity with our own solution stack, I'm sure some of these challenges have probably cropped up for you if you've been involved in this process, but that spreadsheet becomes extremely difficult to maintain. It's highly manual and super time consuming. And ultimately, it's also a competing priority. Our day jobs are not to manage spreadsheets that list all of our SaaS apps. We're focused on things that are more strategic and more important to the business. It's just a necessary evil that we have to deal with periodically as well. And then as we start putting this inventory on a spreadsheet, we may not even have the complete set of data points we would want to actually make decisions. So what we see in a lot of cases when spreadsheets are the de facto solution for an organization is that people will start notating the most generic or high level attributes about the software. What's the vendor? Maybe who owns it or who purchased it within the organization? What's the total amount that we are obligated to pay for that software application? So on and so forth. But what they're missing are things like, what's the ratio between purchase license counts and active user counts? What are the different payment terms and obligations we need to be aware of across this entire contract term? And then what types of renewal dates or renewal auto renewal clauses may exist within these particular contracts? And if we don't capture that information effectively, we can't make good decisions around our actual SaaS application stack. So just a few practical steps here on the bottom to kind of move from this level 1 to level 2, just to take these kind of baby steps, crawl before you run, or crawl before you walk, walk before you run type of approach. Just getting a detailed enough framework in place is a great first step. Effectively getting more columns into your spreadsheet. So we actually have published on our website a SaaS inventory tracker to give you a place to start from if you're finding that you're suffering from some incomplete information today within your own solution. And then of course, we want to do things that are more process oriented, right? We want to schedule our inventory reviews to be more periodic, to maybe align with budgeting or quarterly planning cycles, and not just waiting until the very end of the year to then kind of do a retroactive look at all of the SaaS spend we've had. Then of course, we want to be engaging the people who are using and managing these tools on a day-to-day basis as well. A lot of times departments will self-manage applications, and IT is more of a support mechanism. They're not really centralizing the management fully within IT. So we need to be able to reach out and collaborate with those application owners through maybe surveys or different periodic meetings with them so that we can maintain the freshness of this inventory. And even better, if possible, would be to invite them to collaborate directly in this process so that we can get the most accurate information directly from these end users. So hopping to the next slide, kind of taking the same approach, right, with spend and license management. All these things are sort of compounding and feed into one another, as you'll see through the theme here. But without an inventory, you can't really start analyzing your spend and license management. So once you've established that, we can start going into more depth. And these are really critical to perform as an ongoing initiative, just because of that variance I was mentioning for each SaaS application. So a lot of SaaS applications, they'll have different types of contracts where maybe there are different payment terms or different schedules for those payments. We've even seen it personally with some contracts, maybe from other applications, where the first year is to be paid up front, and then it's quarterly payments in the next year. So if you're not forecasting that appropriately, you may think you have a big expense at the end of the year when actually it needs to be spent every 3 months. So being able to monitor your cash flow in that sense is key. In a previous life, we didn't have a solution that captured that well enough, and on a spreadsheet, it wasn't apparent that that was going to be a change that we would have had to deal with into the next year and the year beyond. And then of course, when you're looking at all these SaaS apps, you're really getting a limited view into kind of the usage data around what these licenses are doing for your business. So we can see that maybe there are some number of licenses procured, but you aren't really sure how many are actually in use. And our data points earlier in the webinar kind of give us some sense of how many could really be underutilized, maybe even up to 50% in some particular applications. Doing this is really time consuming, going app by app, competing against other priorities. And then a lot of times you're even having to engage the vendor itself to get this information because they don't make it simple for you to do for yourself. But we want to make sure that's mitigated, and using some practical approaches can make that simple. So what we always recommend is we want to organize license reviews preemptively to align with the renewal cycles. So rather than waiting until the very end of the year, they should always be done as renewals are approaching, but not just right as the renewal is happening, well in advance. So you can account for things like those penalties or maybe non-standard true ups or annual increases that you weren't really expecting or forecasting for. And then this gives you an opportunity to then renegotiate some of these contracts. You can look through the license agreements, and a great example of this would be, I have an enterprise agreement for every user within my company. I realize 40% of those licenses are underutilized across the business by doing my review. Now I can reduce that to maybe a floating set of licenses that could be assigned and reassigned to users who actually need that app during that moment in time. That right there, multiplied by the several applications you could do that for, creates a material difference in the total amount of spend and investment you have to make. And then of course, all of that is supported by improving the metrics that help better describe what our licenses mean. It's not just a dollar figure, it's a dollar figure coupled with usage activity, like number of logins, satisfaction scores of using that application even. Employee experience is a major driver of SaaS investment, and understanding if people are even liking the applications they're using gives you a better insight on how you should then allocate spend for the next year. So moving into the next phase, this is where you go one step deeper and start looking at security and access. This is a really critical component, and it does move more into the IT world and a little bit out of finance, but security is more of an organizational responsibility. It's no longer limited to just IT or just some web security tool to monitor everything. With SaaS, it's created a responsibility for all of us to act as good stewards of our company's data and our company's finances. So just a couple data points to kind of bring up how security is really impacting organizations. So over the last year, around 80% of IT people have been reporting that they're now responsible for managing SaaS security. So this is really a phenomenon that's happening in almost every company across all industries. And then as we kind of dig one level deeper, of that 80% that are now responsible for it, half of them are reporting that it's too difficult